Molly.
And I'm Marion Wade.
And we're here today to speak to Mary Donnelly.
She was Mary Fogarty and then she came to school in Boherlahan.
What games did you play? Can you give a list?
Well, we played skittles, marbles, hopscotch, all those kind of games, handball, all those kind of things.
Did you amuse yourself in a special way at certain times of the year?
We did. We went picking blackberries and we picked cowslips and primroses for the May altar in school and at home. There was lovely cowslips up in the field at the cross of Boherlahan. Now, when I was coming to school, I came from Sinoan because I lived in Sinoan at that time. So I used to be passing that field and there was loads of cowslips in the field, so that was, everyone went to that field for the cowslips and there were lovely scent of them and we brought them to the school for the May altar.
Do you remember any games played around the fire in the evening or other games outdoors?
Well, I suppose everyone played cards at that time. Playing cards, and that was before television, when people didn't have televisions at that time, so it was a game of cards or something like that they passed their time with.
By what name is your home district known as? What townsland in which parish?
So Sinoan was where the townsland I came from. It's up to the left as you go towards Cashel from the cross. Sinoan, and there's different housing estates up there now, and Sinoan is nearly lost in that scenario up there now. You have West Meadows and you have Longfield View, and they weren't there in my time. It was just Sinoan the lot.
Were there a great number of families in this townsland when you were young?
There was about 13 families really. There was 5 in the lot that I was in, and there was houses then further up, and between all there was about 13 families, and they were all fairly big families at that time. There was 7 in some houses and 5 in more houses and 10 in more houses, like, so that was the way it went. But I came from a family of just 3, so I had 1 brother and 1 sister.
And what were the most common family names then?
Well, I'd say Dwyer was the most common. Dwyer and Ryan really around here was the most common. They had nicknames, I suppose, Dwyer this and Dwyer that and Ryan something else. If you didn't have a nickname, you didn't know who you were speaking about. So that's how it went.
Were there any old people living near you when you were a child?
Well, there was.
Any who spoke Irish?
Not Irish, no, but there was an old man living near us and he came to the house every night, and his name was Paddy Wade, and he came, and the people called that, visiting that time was Cordiac. They came and they chatted about what was topical and what happened in the area and all the rest of it, and that was another way they put down the time in the night time.
You live in Nordstown now, Mary. Do you know where that name came from?
Yes, Nora, I live in Nordstown now. I've been living there for 47 years. And the name of Nordstown came from William Nash. He was a Norman. And he built the castle, I'd say, over in Nordstown as well. That's down on the other road. I'm on the main road now, but the other road runs parallel with it. And that's down at where Thomas Quirk lives. There's a castle down there.
Were any local fairs held around about?
Yeah, the local fairs were in Cashel when I was young. Everything went on the streets. There was no markets at that time. It was the fair day on the street. I think it was the first, maybe Monday or some day like that every month. And the fairs were there, and the farmers drove their cattle on the road, walking. They had to walk most of the time that time to the fairs, and that's where they sold their properties there, the animals, farm animals, cattle and sheep and pigs and what have you. And at Christmas time we had turkey markets. The turkeys were sold live at that time at the market in Cashel. Thomas, Nina, all the towns had turkey markets. You don't see turkey markets now, you buy the turkey in the shop. But when I was growing up, there were turkey markets. Geese as well, some of those, and maybe chickens.
Was the town fair held on the street or in a special fair place?
On the street, on the street. And all the people had to clean up after the fair and everything. There was a big job attached to it because the farmers maybe would come in and the cattle would make a mess in the streets, and it all had to be washed up and whatever. It was a big lot of work attached to it.
What kind of bread was eaten in olden times?
The bread that was eaten in olden times was basically baked in the house. And that time it was open fires and you had an oven pot hanging over the fire lighting, and you baked the bread. The woman in the house usually baked the bread and put the cake into the oven pot and then put the lid on, and then she brought up some red coals from the fire and put them on top of the lid. So that's how she baked her bread. So it was basically all baked bread at home that people used.
Was meat often eaten?
Meat wasn't, well, it was not too much because people couldn't afford meat that time. So they had to kind of compromise with something else.
Was it fresh or salted?
Well, fresh meat on a Sunday maybe, basically, and the salted meat was during the week, and that was beef and lamb and stuff at the weekend. In that time, people used to cure their own bacon. They'd hang it up on the chimney, the chimney breast over the fire, and the bacon was cured there and they cut it themselves.
Was fish common?
Just fish that was fished at the rivers, I think. Just where we were now, that there used to be a lot of fishing done down on the river shore, where there was trout being fished for and eels and sometimes pike. Pike wasn't great, but they got them anyway.
Anything else eaten that is now gone and out of fashion?
Well, nettles. You don't ever see anyone eating nettles. Well, they did in my time. They always had nettles in the springtime. They were supposed to be good for the blood. So people cooked 3 meals of nettles, and sometimes they put them in with cabbage, maybe with the nettles were included.
Were certain foods eaten on special occasions?
Well, Easter time was always a good time for the eggs, and people that had hens and that would give the eggs to other children, and people that were living near them that mightn't have chickens and hens themselves, you'd get eggs for Easter Sunday, and it was a kind of, you'd eat how many you could eat eggs. It wasn't chocolate eggs at Easter time, that time it was ordinary eggs.
What vessels were used to drink it before cups were common?
Jam mugs. Did you ever hear anyone saying a jam mug? Well, I heard my father talk about the jam mugs, that you mightn't have mugs, but the jam came in jars, like something hot's there now, but they were kind of a different, they weren't glass, they were earthenware jars, so they called them jam mugs, and when they were finished with the jam, they washed them out and used them as mugs for their tea.
Have you heard any tales locally about the Fianna?
Well, the story goes that Fionn McCool chased a wild boar around Munster, and around here it would be mentioned that he came by Killock Hill and came down into Cashel from there, the Rock of Cashel, and Ardmeal is mentioned, and he is meant to have crossed the river in Ardmeal 7 times. Would you remember to have crossed the river in Ardmeal 7 times?
Are there any ancient local monuments?
Well, what comes to mind first of all, Marion, is there's an old Biancony stable situated, it's still standing, some of it, basically nearly all of it actually, is up at the left hand side as you go towards Cashel near the cross of Boherlahan. It was an old stable belonging to Biancony. Now, as we're here in the church in Boherlahan, I am the sexton in the church, maybe that's why we're here, but Biancony gave the land for the church here, and also gave the land for Father Joe's house, where Father Joe is now. It's meant to be the only house in the diocese that doesn't belong to the diocese. It was given by Biancony to the priest. Now, he also built this little church here beside this church that we're in, and all his ancestors and himself are laid to rest in that little church. And we are told that the payment for all that was that a mass be said. Now, I remember the masses said there on a Saturday morning long ago, but they seem to have gone because the weather got cold and people were cold going in there, and they were transferred to be said here in the parish church. But that was the payment for the land, was that a mass be said where grasses grow and waters flow for the Biancony family. So as I'm saying that now, Marion, we're here, as I said, in the parish church, and I'd like just to mention that there was mess paths at that time, and a mess path went down to the right from the church here and back up to the left. It went up to Sinoan at this side where people walked mass then. They didn't have cars and they didn't have any way of travel, so they went by the mess paths. Bankin lived around here, that was his home in Longfield House. But before that, when he was standing on the moat at one stage as a young boy, he had a dream. When he looked out at Longfield House, he said that he would live there yet. So his dream came true, and he lived there for 39 or 40 years afterwards at Longfield House. Now it's a stud farm now. I remember it going from the Banconi ancestry in Molly O'Connell was the last of the Banconi ancestry to live there, and then it was sold on to a family by the name of Byrne, and they ran a restaurant and a public house there, and from that then Watchman's bought it for a stud farm.
Are there any local ruins such as castles in the district?
Well, that I know of anyway, Nodstown Castle is down as you go towards the river shore. It's down that road, that's Nodstown Castle. And then when you go over that road and go towards the cemetery in Ardmeal, there is another castle there that's, I'd say, Ardmeal Castle. Some people say it's Castle Mile Castle, but it's in the area of both Castle Mile and Ardmeal. And of course, the church was heading for to be a ruin as well, but in Father Feehan's time here, I think he worked hard to get it given back to the Catholic Church. So now it hosts weddings down there, and the Heritage have meetings there and different things like that. And then you have Ballytharsna Castle, which is down near enough to Killoch. And there's another castle up near the roundabout on the Dublin Road. I'm not quite sure, but that might be Ballykelly Castle because it's in that area, Ballykelly.
Changes in the area over the years, have you noticed?
Well, there's lots of changes, Marion, over the years. I start off with the school where I started in school. It was then just a small two-teacher school. Now it's a great big school, and they have 5 teachers and 140 pupils in it.
106, whatever, yeah.
That's a big change at that time. And then there was no electricity, of course, at that time, which meant there was no heating in the schools either. That it was just a big stove thing, and everyone brought torch to school or sticks to school or whatever to heat the classrooms. That's the only form of heat we had. And we brought bottles of tea to school for our lunch, and we put the bottles into a stocking to keep them warm, and you stood all the stockings, the bottles with the stockings on them. That's funny now, isn't it? Around the fire to keep them hot, and that's what we had for our lunch. And there was no such thing as Eddie's shop for rolls then. It was just bring your lunch in a paper, and that was it. You probably more than likely had cake bread that was baked at home for your lunch every day. So that was how that went with the school. Then the shop outside got much bigger. That was a very small shop. There was just one little counter, and you went in, you asked Mrs. Dwyer in the shop for what you wanted, and she gave it out to you, and you paid and you went off. And now it's a supermarket scene, and it's totally different to what I grew up with, a little shop going in and saying what you wanted. Then we had 2 shops actually. At the other side of the school there was a post office where Tommy and Bernie lives now. There was a post office there, and they had a little shop. She was a Mrs. Flynn. She was a very old woman when I was growing up, and she used to have little bags of sweets, and she'd twist around the bag, and we were all meant to go in for the sweets. If you had a penny, you went for the sweets. And I have a good memory of talking about a penny, going to school one day, and the bus passes this way, and it still passed that time. And when we were sent out to school, I stood at the crossroads up there to wait for the bus to pay my penny, because I got a penny going to school, and to go on the bus.
Down to school?
To school on the bus. It was a great thing to go on the bus because
For a
we were
penny.
walking every other day. So that's where my penny went that day. I didn't go to the shop at all. But things like that, even in Hennessy's, where Tom Hennessy is now, they had a shop at that time too, and they sold bread and sweets and whatever you needed, the basic things. And there was a friend of mine, she's a nun now, she was Sheila Wade, she was reared up on my road with her granddad and her grandmother, and she was in my class going to school, and he was quite nice to her, the grandfather, and he'd go into Hennessy's and he'd pay for whatever she could get going home. And she'd usually get a sweet cake, but there was no knife to cut it on, and we just got the sweet cake and we broke off bits of it and we had that going home.
Imagine.
So that was a memory of school days. And like all the houses now, as I say, they're all changed, big houses, much bigger than the other houses, and where the small houses where there was big families around, you know, maybe 2 rooms. Where I am living now, it's a newer house, but the old house, there was only 2 bedrooms in it, and that's where my father was reared in Notstown. So like, there's big changes. So.
And we really like interviewing you.
We enjoyed doing the interview, and thank you for letting us into the sacristy. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, girls. You're very welcome.